Now you're just going to continue in this method of wrapping pegs until you have 5 pegs wrapped on this side, 5 unwrapped pegs, and then 5 pegs wrapped on this side. Now you have 2/3 of your pegs wrapped. You have 5 pegs wrapped on this side, and then you have 5 pegs that are not wrapped, and then you have 5 pegs that are wrapped on this side. So now you're ready to start the second part of your heel. Now we're going to be working in an outward direction. We're going to our first wrapped peg, and we're going to knit that peg. We're going to take the stitch and the wrap up over the peg. And when you get to the next wrap peg, we're going to wrap it again. We're going to take the stitch and the wrap up over the peg, take the yarn around the back of the peg, bring it forward, and then put both stitches back on the peg. Be very careful to get both loops back on the peg. And then we're going to turn it again, and we're going to be careful not to work that peg, and then just continue knitting in the opposite direction till we get to our first wrap. Okay, when we get to our first wrap peg, we're going to knit that peg, take the wrap and the stitch up over the peg. And you can do it one at a time if it's a little tight. Make sure you get both loops. And then on the next wrap peg, we're going to wrap it. We're going to take the stitch and the loop and the wrap off the peg, hold it, wrap the peg, and then put both loops back on the peg. Make sure you get both loops. There you go. And then turn your yarn and work in the opposite direction. And again, make sure you do not loop over this peg. I'm going to continue knitting. And again, you're going to go to the next wrap peg on the other side. When you get to the next wrap peg, you actually have 2 wraps on this peg, 2 wraps and 1 stitch. You're going to knit that peg. So you're going to take all 3 loops off of the peg. And when you get to the next wrap peg, you're going to wrap it again. Take the stitch and the wrap up over the peg. Then you're going to wrap that peg. Make sure you get both loops back on the peg, and you can put them on one at a time if it makes it easier. And then be sure to wrap that peg. Do not work it. And then just work back to your first wrapped peg. You're going to continue hooking over your wrap stitches in this process until you have all your wraps hooked over. Now we're down to our last wrap peg on this side. This peg has 1 stitch and 2 wraps on it, and we're going to work this peg. So we're going to lay our yarn and take all 3 loops over this peg. And then we have completed all of our heel stitches on this side. So we're going to go to the peg on the outside of our heel stitches and actually wrap that peg. And then we're going to go back towards the other side. And we're going to actually hook over that last peg on the other side that has wraps on it. Okay, this is our last wrapped peg on this side. It has a stitch and 2 wraps on it. We're going to work this peg. So we're going to take all the loops up and over the peg. Okay, now all of our pegs have been worked on this side. And so now we're going to wrap the adjacent peg. You want to take off that stitch, wrap that peg, put that loop back down. Now we have completed the heel. We have a nice little cup here where our heel's going to go, and we now have 1 stitch on each of our pegs. But there's one more thing we need to do for our heel. We need to do some reinforcement. So what we're going to do is take the previous stitch from the adjacent peg to our heel pegs. That would be this stitch here and actually this peg here. Now you want to take the previous stitch from the peg that's adjacent to your beginning heel stitch. Take that previous stitch up and over your first heel stitch. And also on your last heel stitch, you want to take the adjacent peg and take the previous stitch and take that up and over your last heel stitch. And that's just going to reinforce the edges of your heel. Now that your heel is complete, you are ready to knit the foot of your sock. When you get to the pegs with 2 loops, be sure to lift both loops off the peg.